I know I always say this, but one of the best things about the shows of the DC animated universe is the way the writers took established comic book characters with complex backstories and characteristics and simplified them. In some cases, they made significant changes while staying true to the character's spirit, often creating the definitive version of the character. One such figure is the Creeper, who made his debut in the new Batman Adventures episode, Beware the Creeper. If you're only familiar with the Creeper because of his appearance in this show, then it may surprise you to learn that the Creeper isn't traditionally a Batman character. That's not to say that he never crossed paths with Batman before. There were multiple crossovers over the years, but he was not originally a resident of Gotham City. The Creeper was created by Steve Ditko and Don Siegel, and made his first appearance in Showcase 73. Now, if you're wondering where you've heard the name Steve Ditko before, he is the co-creator of Spider-Man and the majority of his most memorable villains. Ditko's career at Marvel and his departure is an important point. It's a fairly long story, and some of the details have been lost to time, but a quick and dirty summary is that Ditko had fallen out with Stan Lee, partially because of the liberal content that Stan had been writing into their Spider-Man comics. For anyone unaware of the Marvel style of comic book creation, Stan Lee would write an outline of the events of the issue and then leave it up to the penciler to determine what actually happened in the story. Once the art was complete, Stan would then go in and write the dialogue. Stan Lee was a pretty liberal guy. I mean, have you guys even heard of the X-Men? While Ditko was more conservative. Ditko held objectionist beliefs that there was right and there was wrong with no middle ground. Think of B-Tat's villain Lockup, just less homicidal. But this clash in political views could cause friction between the two, and so in 1966, Ditko left Marvel Comics to work elsewhere. He headed to Charlton Comics, where he created characters like Captain Atom and The Question, and DC Comics, where he created characters such as Hawk and Dove and The Creeper. Ditko would collaborate with writer Don Siegel to help with the dialogue for the comic, much as Stan Lee had done on Spider-Man. In his first appearance, we're introduced to outspoken TV newsman Jack Ryder. Within the first few moments of meeting him, we see Jack anger the sponsors of his show by being critical of a prominent liberal doctor that called out the police's use of violence. This very same doctor will later be seen calling on the police at the first sign of trouble, indicating Ditko's disdain for the perceived hypocrisy of liberal intellectuals. Ryder is fired and takes a job at the network on their investigation team. His first task is to find a missing Russian defector, Professor Yats. Yats had been kidnapped by the mob, and they planned on returning him to the Russians for a hefty fee. Ryder tracked the doctor's location to the gangster's mansion, where a costume ball was taking place. Realizing that he'd stand out like a sore thumb in his civilian clothes, Ryder went to the nearest costume shop and put together a jumbled outfit, painted his face yellow, and popped on a green wig. The perfect disguise. While fighting with the gangsters, Ryder found a hidden door that led to a secret room where the professor was being held, but was stabbed in the process. The professor intervened with his special serum, which would heal Ryder and increase his strength and stamina. As impressive as the formula was, the professor's greatest feat, however, was a device that would rearrange objects on a molecular level. This essentially allowed people to switch between two states. For instance, a soldier could switch at the press of a button to a civilian state, making his equipment and weaponry effectively appear and disappear on command. The professor feared how the Russians may misuse this technology. Imagine a legion of tourists that would be able to switch into heavily armoured soldiers at the touch of a button. And so he hid the device inside of Ryder's wound. In the process, Ryder's Creeper outfit became mapped to the device, allowing him to instantly switch to and from his new costumed identity. And that red sheepskin rug that he wore as a cape was now part of his anatomy. The professor and Ryder tried to destroy all of the research that instructed how to replicate the process. And when the gangsters tried to stop them, the professor was killed in the struggle. Ryder vowed to get revenge on the gangsters and bring them to justice. While Ryder was exactly the same person during his transformation, he felt that he had to adopt a personality that more matched his bizarre outfit. He also found that if he cackled like a lunatic, it distressed his enemies, making them easier to defeat. During all of this, the aforementioned liberal doctor called the police, again reflecting Ditko's disdain for liberal intellectuals, showing them to be hobnobbing with treasonous criminals and calling the police at the first sign of trouble, and in the scuffle, Ryder accidentally hit a policeman, making him a target for the law. So the Creeper became a misunderstood hero that was mistaken for a villain, no matter how many good deeds he performed. Sounds like a certain wall crawler over at Marvel Comics, doesn't it? Over the years, the Creeper would come into contact with Batman, for instance teaming up with him to defeat the Helgramite, and even one time coming into conflict with the Joker. Despite having co-created arguably the most popular superhero of all time, Ditko's The Creeper never really seemed to catch on. It may be that his appearance was too outlandish, or that the general concept of a misunderstood weird-looking guy running around in his underwear was hard for most audiences to engage with. After Crisis on Infinite Earths, in which most of DC Comics continuity was reset, the Creeper was given a slightly different origin that removed all of the Cold War references and Ditko's disdain for liberals. This time, investigative reporter Jack Ryder had placed a bug in the office of known gangsters to try to get the scoop on their criminal wrongdoings. However, what Ryder didn't know is that the gangsters were aware of his acts of espionage, and so they lured him into a trap. When the gangsters got their hands on him, they beat him senseless and pumped him full of drugs, putting him into a stupor. As an unconventional way of shaming him, the gangsters dressed Ryder in a bizarre jester costume, although that doesn't look like any sort of jester I've ever seen, and mocked him in front of their costume party guests, before inviting them to kick the crap out of him even more. Ryder was then taken out to the woods and shot. However, his body was discovered by Professor Yates, who had been cajoled into developing tech for the gangsters. The professor used his molecular altering device to revive Ryder, but in the process mapped Ryder's drugged and costume state to the device. Ryder and the professor teamed up to destroy the research material, and in the process, the professor was shot by the gangsters. Vowing revenge, Ryder switched to his now psychotic alter identity, who he named the Creeper, and got revenge on the mob. Ryder awoke the next day at his typewriter with a full report of the incident written up by the Creeper, which was then published in the newspapers. Ryder seemingly had no knowledge of what the Creeper had done, but he didn't seem too bothered by it. At least not at first. The story closes by describing the Creeper as Ryder's other self, free of inhibitions, that lives in twilight. Essentially, he's the personification of Ryder's intoxicated self. If you've ever been blackout drunk but still physically awake, that's who the Creeper is. The person that's there when you aren't there. The id. And that brings us to the time of Batman the Animated Series. Bruce Timm had originally wanted to include the Creeper in the first run of the show. Here's the original design of the character, but felt that the scripts involving him weren't up to scratch. There were concerns that a single episode wouldn't be enough to do justice to the Creeper's origin. We can see a hint at this idea when looking at the early design work for the new Batman adventures back when the show's working title was Batman Gotham Knights. Notice that the Creeper is present as part of the Bat family, implying that at one point he may have been intended to have a more prominent role. When the new Batman adventures hit the air, reporter Jack Ryder made brief appearances in a number of episodes. Cold Comfort, Joker's Millions, Over the Edge, Chemistry. But the Creeper only made one appearance. The Creeper's animated origin is firmly connected to the Joker. Jack Ryder presents a TV special to mark 7 years since the incident that led to the creation of the Joker at the Ace Chemical plant. Ryder and his news crew are attacked, live on television, by the Joker. It's important to note that Ryder and his team are entirely secondary to the Joker. He doesn't actually care about them, he simply saw attacking them as a good way of attracting the attention of Batman. And so the Joker gasses Ryder and throws him into the same vat of acid that the Joker had fallen into all those years ago. I feel like this origin for the Creeper completely undermines the argument that has been made by the Joker in various forms of media across the years. All it takes for a good person to become an insane villain is to have one bad day. In this case, Ryder has a pretty terrible day, but he doesn't become a villain, and further illustrates what I've said previously about how the Joker was evil long before he took that fabled dunk in a tank of acid. The mixture of the Joker's laughing gas and being submerged in the acid causes a curious transformation in Ryder. It turns his hair green and his skin yellow, not too dissimilar to the Joker, but also makes him lose all inhibitions. Rather than being tormented by his transformation and seeking revenge, as many other characters in this universe had done after a radical transformation, Ryder wants to bring the Joker to justice, although his methods are unconventional. It's clear he's having a great time as the Creeper, although he does cause some alarm after inadvertently leering at a woman getting ready for bed in her bathroom. The light, comical tone of the episode is a clear reference to the lighter period of Batman stories, long before he got all gritty and dark. There's even a scene where Ryder puts on a mask that resembles Adam West's Batman as he searches for his own identity, before smashing it. And that's not the only deep-cut reference for fans of the character. There's a nice nod to Steve Ditko with the thrift store named after him. And hey, doesn't that mannequin look just like the Question? I appreciate little references like this. While the shoppers in Gotham are concerned by this unhinged man running around town, I'm particularly amused by the woman that works in the thrift store, showing no concern about him at all, offering deadpan fashion advice. Thinking about it, she works in a late-night thrift store in Gotham City. She's probably seen all sorts of things. There's something delightful about seeing this bright yellow character in green underpants and a red feather boa running around the dark streets of Gotham City. It's almost like a Looney Tunes character had taken a wrong turn at Albuquerque and found himself in Gotham. That's not to say that everything about the Creeper is positive. His infatuation with Harley Quinn and refusal to take no for an answer is gross in the post-Me Too era, but it does act as a stark contrast with the Joker, who rejects Harley's sexual advances and abuses her. I'm also reminded of Pepe Le Pew and his endless lust for that black cat. Batman and Robin spend much of this episode chasing after the Creeper, who is pursuing the Joker, and the episode ends with a conflict at the Ace scrapyard, the same company that owns the chemical plant. There's doubtlessly some symbolism there, but I'm not quite sure what it is. Batman is able to sedate the Creeper and gives Ryder a patch that can be used to suppress his transformation. The episode ends with Ryder accepting the patch, but as soon as Batman leaves, he discards them, suggesting that this is not the last that we've seen of that yellow, wacky guy. Well, you'd think that, but the new Batman adventures unceremoniously ended after the first season to make way for Batman Beyond. The Creeper made a handful of background appearances during Justice League Unlimited, most notably battling the Ultimen in Panic in the Sky, but given Batman's stance on the Creeper, it was surprising to see him as a member of the Justice League. This would be partially explained in the new Batman Adventures tie-in comic Gotham Adventures number 58. In this story, we see that Ryder has rejected Batman's help and was trying to fight crime on the streets of Gotham. Ryder came into contact with the sleepwalking Arnold Wesker, whose unconscious body was being controlled by Scarface in a scheme to take over Gotham's organised crime families. While Batman scolded Ryder and refused to cooperate with him, as the Creeper he would prove himself to be a creative problem solver with a compassionate heart. Rather than attacking Wesker, the Creeper took the Scarface puppet and pretended to be Scarface, issuing nonsensical orders to his henchmen to defuse the situation until the police arrived. The issue ends with Batman sort of, kind of, but not exactly giving the Creeper his blessing, stating that while he had been rooting for Wesker, this whole situation has taught him that maybe putting up with a little craziness is acceptable. And that's it for the Creeper. He's very clearly a character that was liked by the DCAU creative team, but he didn't get enough time to be used extensively. As much as I appreciate what they were trying to do with him, I think he works best when used sparingly. There is a neat juxtaposition between the grimdark atmosphere of the new Batman adventures and the zany hijinks of the Creeper, but it may have gotten old quite quickly. Still, this interpretation of the character would have a lasting impact. In 2006, writer Steve Niles wrote a miniseries that directly tied the Creeper to the Joker, revealing that the kindly professor was not quite as benevolent as he had seemed and had laced his serum with Joker toxin. This is just another example of how these seminal cartoons would go on to influence the comic book source material. Let's just not talk about that brief period in time when the Creeper was reimagined as a Japanese Oni, possessing Jack Ryder to cause mischief. Okay, that's it for this week's essay. If you liked the video, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, leave a comment, tell all your friends about me. You know how YouTube works. If you really enjoyed the video and have the means, please consider making use of the thanks button to send a buck or two my way, because every little helps. I offer channel memberships for $1.99 a month. This will get you early access to my weekly video essay, priority responses to your comments, members-only videos, custom emojis, and an icon on your profile indicating that you're one of my people. And special thanks to my current channel members, who are all listed on the screen right now. Okay, so next time I'm going to follow up on some of the ideas raised in this video, and that's something I've touched on a few times recently. I'm going to talk about a concept that should be familiar to Batman fans, the idea of one bad day being all it takes to drive someone mad. It's an idea perpetuated by the Joker in The Killing Joke, and I want to talk about how Batman the Animated Series rejected this philosophy when it came to their villains. And the perfect example of this comes in one of my favourite episodes, Trial. Hope to see you then.